Ever seen neighbors beg for a taste of someone else's cooking? African American meals did that, filled with spice, love, and flavor that made Sunday dinners unforgettable. What made those dishes powerful enough to cross fences and change hearts? Smothered pork chops and gravy were the kind of meal that made a house feel like home before the first bite was even taken. The sound of onions sizzling in a cast-iron skillet filled the kitchen, while the smell of seasoned pork drifted out onto the porch. Every family had their own trick. Some browned the meat first, others let it simmer slow until it fell apart under the fork. The gravy was the real treasure, thickened from pan drippings and stirred until glossy, poured over rice or mashed potatoes until every bit was coated. It was Sunday food, the kind that brought everyone to the table without a word being said. You could taste care in every bite, the patience it took to turn something simple into comfort. Neighbors who caught the scent from next door always found a reason to stop by. One plate of smothered pork chops and you understood what warmth really meant. Collard greens with smoked turkey necks carried an aroma that wrapped around entire neighborhoods. The greens simmered low and slow in a pot filled with smoky broth until they softened into silk. Turkey necks replaced ham hocks for many, giving the dish that same deep flavor without all the salt. The broth, known lovingly as Potlikker, was liquid gold, rich, peppery, and full of soul. Served with a hunk of cornbread to soak it up, it was a meal born from resourcefulness and heart. You could always tell when someone was cooking greens because the smell lingered through the evening air, a signal that good eating was near. This was the kind of dish that turned hardship into heritage, where nothing went to waste and everything had purpose. It fed bodies, but it also fed pride, history, and the comfort of home. Sweet potato pie was more than dessert. It was love baked into a flaky crust. Each pie started with boiled or roasted sweet potatoes mashed until smooth, then mixed with sugar, eggs, butter, and just the right touch of spice. The filling baked up silky, golden, and fragrant, filling the room with a sweetness that felt like a hug. It was always served last, but it was what everyone waited for. No holiday, no Sunday dinner, no church gathering was complete without it. Grandmothers would guard their recipes with pride, measuring not with spoons, but with memory. Every slice was a reminder that joy could be made from the humblest ingredients. The first taste always lingered, a perfect balance of spice, warmth, and history. Sweet potato pie wasn't just food, it was testimony to skill, care, and generations of love that never forgot where it came from. Hot water cornbread crackled in the skillet, golden and crisp on the outside, tender within. It was made from cornmeal, salt, and boiling water, mixed by hand and fried immediately in bubbling oil. The batter sizzled, puffed, and browned, sending up a smell that could stop a conversation mid-sentence. No fancy ingredients, no measuring cups, just instinct and rhythm passed down through memory. Served with greens, beans, or fried fish, it was the glue that held the meal together. It tasted like home, humble, yet perfect in its simplicity. The crust shattered with the first bite, giving way to a soft, almost creamy center. Neighbors used to joke that you could tell who was frying cornbread just by the way the air smelled. It was everyday food made extraordinary, proof that skill and heart could turn even the simplest recipe into something unforgettable. Hoppin John was the dish of luck, laughter, and New Year's gatherings that stretched well into the night. Made with black-eyed peas, rice, and bits of smoked meat, it was both hearty and symbolic. Every piece had to bring prosperity for the year ahead. The flavors deepened as it cooked, with onions, garlic, and a hint of spice blending into something more than comfort. It was community in a pot. Families passed around bowls while telling stories, each bite connecting past and present. For many, it wasn't just a meal, but a ritual, a tradition born in the South that spread far beyond it. Paired with collard greens and cornbread, it became a feast that celebrated resilience and hope. Even white neighbors came knocking for a serving once they caught wind of that unmistakable aroma. Hoppin John wasn't just good eating, it was good fortune made real. Buttermilk fried chicken was a work of patience and pride, a dish that could silence any crowd with the first crunch. Each piece was soaked in tangy buttermilk, seasoned with salt, pepper, and secrets only grandmothers knew. Then it was dredged in flour and fried slow in cast iron, the oil popping and singing as the crust turned golden brown. The skin was crisp, the meat juicy, and the smell alone was enough to draw folks from down the street. Fried chicken was more than food. It was a statement of mastery. You could always tell who had the best recipe in town because their yard filled up first on picnic days. The taste was perfection, savory, crisp, and full of soul. It was the flavor of Sunday gatherings, porch laughter, and family love sealed in every bite. Okra and tomato stew was proof that a few good vegetables and patience could create something divine. The okra thickened as it simmered, mingling with ripe tomatoes, onions, and a splash of broth until everything came together in a tangy, tender medley. Some added bacon or smoked sausage, others let the garden flavors speak for themselves. It was the kind of meal that could stretch to feed many, ladled over rice or eaten with cornbread on the side. The scent of stewing tomatoes filled the air, earthy and warm, reminding everyone of summer's last harvest. Every spoonful carried the taste of care, of homegrown goodness turned into comfort. This was food made by hand, with heart, and meant to be shared. Okra and tomato stew didn't just fill stomachs, it fed the spirit with its slow, steady warmth. Candied yams were the sweetheart of every dinner table, glowing like amber under the light. Thick slices of yams simmered in butter, brown sugar, and a touch of cinnamon until the syrup clung to each piece like honey. The smell alone was enough to make neighbors wander over with a smile. Each forkful melted soft and sweet, carrying that balance of caramel and spice that felt like a holiday no matter the day. Mothers and grandmothers made it look effortless, knowing just when to pull the pan from the oven, bubbling, sticky, and perfect. It wasn't dessert, but it might as well have been. Candied yams brought sweetness to balance the savory, warmth to balance the day's hard work. They were joy in a dish, humble and heavenly all at once. Ham hocks and pinto beans were the meal that taught patience, simmering for hours until everything blended into pure comfort. The smoky flavor of the hocks seeped into the beans, turning simple ingredients into something unforgettable. The pot would sit on the back burner all afternoon, filling the house with that unmistakable scent of slow-cooked goodness. Served with cornbread or rice, it was hearty enough to feed a crowd and humble enough to feed it often. Nothing fancy, just real food that told the story of making much out of little. The broth was thick and rich, the beans tender but not mushy, every bite full of soul. It was the kind of meal that made folks linger at the table long after the plates were clean. Ham hocks and pinto beans weren't just dinner, they were comfort stretched to its fullest. Macaroni and cheese-baked Southern style was the definition of irresistible. Forget the boxed kind. This was homemade, layered with sharp cheddar and a creamy custard that baked to a golden crust on top. Each spoonful was rich, cheesy, and bubbling with flavor, the edges crisp while the center stayed soft and velvety. Families served it at Sunday dinners, church socials, and holidays alike, where it always vanished first. You could hear the spoon scrape the pan as guests went back for seconds and thirds. The smell of baking cheese and butter was enough to draw every neighbor's attention. This dish wasn't just comfort. It was community, love, and pride all baked together. Even the most skeptical neighbors begged for the recipe, but somehow it never tasted quite the same anywhere else. Macaroni and cheese done right was a masterpiece, simple yet deeply soulful. Catfish nuggets with cornmeal crust were the golden promise of every Friday night fish fry. Cut from fresh fillets and dredged in seasoned cornmeal, they fried up crisp and fragrant, the scent alone enough to make mouths water from the porch. Each bite snapped before melting into tender, flaky fish seasoned with paprika, salt, and a touch of love. Served hot with hush puppies and coleslaw, they were food for laughter and togetherness, eaten from paper plates with fingers that glistened in the evening light. The oil popped, radios hummed, and children ran between folding chairs while grown folks talked under the glow of streetlights. It was never just about the fish. It was about gathering, about community built through shared plates and good sound. Fried catfish connected generations and neighbors alike, a dish so simple yet so powerful that one taste could make a memory last forever. Barbecue ribs with molasses sauce were an unspoken invitation that carried down entire blocks. The scent of hickory smoke rolled through the air, curling around porches and drawing people like a song. The ribs cooked low and slow in backyard pits, brushed with a sauce sweetened by molasses and sharpened with vinegar. The meat turned tender enough to fall from the bone, the glaze caramelizing into a sticky, smoky perfection that clung to your fingers and lips. Neighbors would gather before the grill, swapping stories while the cook moved with quiet pride, knowing when to turn, when to baste, and when to serve. Barbecue wasn't just food, it was ceremony, love expressed through time and fire. Those ribs were proof that patience and care could turn simple ingredients into something divine, the kind of flavor that made people remember where they came from. Red velvet cake was the crown jewel of celebration, a dessert that needed no introduction. Its deep red crumb and cream cheese frosting stood out like a ruby on the table, elegant and proud. Each slice was soft, rich, and balanced between cocoa and sweetness, baked for weddings, holidays, and every special moment worth remembering. The color was a promise of joy, a burst of warmth that turned an ordinary gathering into an occasion. Cooks took pride in its perfect layers, smoothing the frosting with precision and care. The first bite melted on the tongue, sweet but not cloying, familiar yet luxurious. It was the cake of achievement, of showing your best for the people you loved most. Even those who claimed not to like cake couldn't resist asking for just a little slice. Red velvet wasn't just dessert. It was legacy, love, and artistry on a plate. Chicken and dumplings were the kind of comfort that wrapped around you like a blanket on a cold night. The broth simmered for hours, thickened by time and flour-dusted hands. Shredded chicken floated beneath pillowy dumplings that puffed up soft and tender, absorbing every bit of flavor. It wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. This was the food of patience, of stories told at the table while steam fogged the windows. The first spoonful burned your tongue in the best way. The second melted all your worries away. It was nourishment for both body and soul, the kind of meal that brought neighbors together during hard times and good. Chicken and dumplings didn't just fill stomachs, they filled hearts, one bowl at a time. Field peas and rice, known as peas and purloo along the Carolina coast, was the quiet hero of countless dinners. The dish came together with a handful of ingredients, peas, rice, smoked meat, and spice, but it carried generations of memory. Each grain of rice soaked up the broth until every bite tasted of the land and sea that raised it. It was simple, sustaining, and endlessly adaptable, cooked slow and shared quick. Families served it alongside greens, cornbread, or simply on its own, steaming and fragrant from the pot. You could tell a lot about a cook by their purloo, the balance of salt, the tenderness of the peas, the way the flavors lingered. This was more than a side dish. It was a language of care spoken through food, the taste of heritage still alive in every kitchen that remembers its roots. The beauty of it was in its simplicity. No waste, no excess, just what the earth and sea provided. Sometimes it was dressed up with smoked sausage or shrimp, sometimes made plain for hard times, but it always carried the same quiet grace. Every spoonful was a connection between generations, from the fields where ancestors worked to the tables where families gathered. Field peas and rice didn't shout its story. It sang it softly with the steady rhythm of tradition. Fried green tomatoes were the definition of turning nothing into something worth celebrating. Picked before they ripened, sliced thick, and dredged in seasoned cornmeal, they hit the hot skillet with a sound that promised magic. The edges sizzled and browned, the centers stayed soft, and the first bite burst with tangy warmth. They were crispy, tender, and addictive, a perfect mix of tart and savory that made mouths water long before they hit the table. Served with a dollop of hot sauce or a swipe of mayonnaise, they reminded everyone that waste had no place in the Southern kitchen. What others might have thrown away, black cooks turned into gold. Fried green tomatoes were ingenuity at its finest, a reminder that flavor, like strength, often comes from what others overlook. The smell of cornmeal and oil filled the house, spilling out the windows and pulling people toward the stove. They were eaten standing up, too good to wait for plates. Each bite tasted like sunshine caught before its time, like a lesson in making the most of what you have. It wasn't just food. It was invention, survival, and joy all fried together. Gumbo with andouille sausage and shrimp was a story told in steam, a dance between land and sea. The roux started it all. Flour and oil stirred until deep brown, almost smoky, the mark of a patient hand. Then came the trinity of onions, celery, and bell pepper, followed by sausage, shrimp, and a slow simmer that made time stand still. The smell filled every corner, thick and rich with spice and history. Gumbo wasn't just a meal, it was a gathering, each pot slightly different, each one carrying its maker's fingerprint. Served over rice, it was comfort, memory, and pride spooned into a single bowl. A good gumbo could bring silence to a table full of laughter, that first taste commanding respect. This was flavor that told the story of survival, of blending traditions until they became something entirely new and entirely home. Every stir of the spoon carried echoes of ancestry, African, French, Creole, and native, woven together through generations. The pot was where cultures met and became one, where spices and thyme transformed humble ingredients into celebration. You could feel the love in its depth, see the patience in its shine. Gumbo wasn't written in recipes. It was learned through hands, through years, through the unspoken language of soul food that never needed explaining. Oxtail stew was proof that nothing was ever wasted in a kitchen ruled by creativity. Once considered a poor man's cut, oxtail turned into a masterpiece through patience and skill. The meat simmered for hours, in a pot filled with broth, onions, and herbs until it fell off the bone, rich and silky. The broth thickened into something close to gravy, glossy and full of depth. Every spoonful was a reward for waiting, each bite heavy with history and care. Served with rice or mashed potatoes, it turned hunger into gratitude. You could smell it long before you saw it, that deep, savory perfume drifting from the stove. Oxtail stew didn't need fancy ingredients. It needed love, time, and the quiet understanding that the best things take both. It was the kind of dish that spoke softly but stayed in your memory, a reminder of how skill could transform the simplest things into comfort. Families often cooked it on Sundays, letting the pot bubble while church songs played faintly from the radio. The stew was more than food. It was a rhythm, a way of slowing down and honoring the day. Every bite told a story of endurance, a flavor born from resourcefulness and tradition. Oxtail stew proved that nothing humble stays humble for long when love is at the stove. Sweet tea fried chicken was Southern innovation at its sweetest. The chicken soaked overnight in brewed tea, lemon, and a touch of sugar, giving it a tenderness and flavor unlike any other. When dredged in seasoned flour and fried to a golden crackle, it came out crisp on the outside and delicate within. The tea left behind a subtle caramel note that balanced perfectly with the salt and spice. It was familiar, yet just surprising enough to make people whisper after the first bite. This was the kind of twist that only came from generations of cooks who understood instinct better than recipes. Served hot with biscuits or cold from the icebox, it was the flavor of creativity born from tradition. Sweet tea fried chicken wasn't just clever, it was soulful, surprising, and absolutely unforgettable. The sound of it frying was almost musical, a steady hiss that promised joy before the meal even began. The sweetness in the crust told of hands that knew how to balance flavor with feeling. It tasted of front porch evenings, iced tea glasses sweating in the heat, and laughter rising with the cicadas. This dish wasn't born in a cookbook. It came from heart, intuition, and the quiet brilliance of home cooks who turned ordinary meals into legacy. Homemade biscuits with cane syrup were the morning's quiet glory, made from scratch before most of the world was awake. The dough came together with soft hands and cold butter, folded until flaky and tall. Pulled from the oven golden and steaming, the biscuits split open in clouds of warmth. Cane syrup, thick and amber, dripped slowly across the surface, pooling at the edges. It was sweetness that didn't rush, smooth, earthy, and real. You didn't need anything fancy. No silverware, no ceremony, just a plate, a smile, and maybe a little butter melting into the cracks. These biscuits were comfort made visible, love you could taste before the day even began. Every bite felt like a promise that no matter how hard life got, there would always be something warm waiting on the table. The smell of baking biscuits filled the house long before sunrise, waking children before the rooster did. The syrup caught the light like honey, thick and golden, poured from old glass jars that had seen a lifetime of mornings. It was a breakfast that asked for nothing but gratitude, a simple joy that made even an ordinary day feel blessed. These biscuits weren't just food, they were a ritual, a reminder that love is most powerful when it's shared quietly. Cabbage and smoked sausage skillet was a one-pan miracle that stretched humble ingredients into something hearty and full of flavor. Thick slices of cabbage wilted in bacon grease or butter, soaking up every ounce of smoky goodness from the sausage. The sizzle filled the kitchen, the scent of garlic and pepper drawing everyone closer. It was the kind of meal that didn't need fancy presentation, just a big spoon and a crowd to feed. Cheap, filling, and endlessly comforting, it brought the warmth of home to every plate. The sausage browned at the edges, the cabbage softened just enough, and everything turned golden in the skillet's heat. A dish like this spoke of resilience, how creativity turned scraps into satisfaction. Families ate it over rice, with cornbread or straight from the pan, laughing and talking between bites. It was proof that you didn't need much to make something unforgettable. Bread pudding with bourbon sauce was the sweet salvation of old bread and even older memories. Cubes of leftover loaf soaked in milk, eggs, and sugar until they swelled soft as clouds. Baked golden and drizzled with a warm bourbon sauce, it became a dessert worthy of pride and praise. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the house long before the pan was pulled from the oven. Every spoonful was tender, rich, and full of warmth, a mix of thrift and indulgence only Southern kitchens could perfect. It was often served at holidays or church suppers, when nothing went to waste and everything had meaning. The bourbon glaze was poured slow, its scent deep and comforting, a grown-up sweetness that whispered of celebration. Bread pudding wasn't just dessert, it was redemption, proof that love could turn even the simplest beginnings into luxury. It was the kind of sweet that brought quiet to a noisy room, every bite melting into pure contentment. Some cooks added raisins or a drizzle of cream, others swore by plain bread and spice, but every version held the same soul. It was dessert made from wisdom, from the rhythm of making something beautiful from what you already had. Fried corn with bacon drippings was summer in a skillet. Ears of fresh corn were scraped clean, the kernels and milk sizzling together in a bath of smoky drippings. The sound was music, a soft hiss that meant comfort was on its way. Each stir turned the mixture creamy without ever needing cream, the starch from the corn binding it into something rich and velvety. A sprinkle of salt, maybe a touch of sugar, and the dish was done. Served hot beside greens or fried chicken, it carried the essence of a southern garden straight to the table. The bacon drippings gave it a deep, savory soul, while the corn brought sweetness that felt like sunshine. It was humble but heavenly, the kind of recipe no one wrote down because everyone already knew it by heart. Fried corn was proof that flavor didn't come from ingredients. It came from memory. The smell alone could stop conversation, thick and warm like a summer afternoon. Each bite tasted like a story passed down through generations, from fields to kitchens to family tables. It was both food and history, a skillet full of love, simplicity, and the reminder that the best meals start with what's already home. Chitterlings and hot sauce were a test of patience, courage, and skill, a dish you had to earn. The cleaning alone could take hours, but for those who knew the craft, it was worth every minute. The chitlins simmered slow in a seasoned broth until tender and aromatic, transforming from humble trimmings into a delicacy. When served with a splash of hot sauce and a slice of cornbread, They carried a flavor like no other, deep, earthy, and unapologetically bold. Some swore by them, others swore off them, but nobody forgot them. The smell alone could fill a block and start a conversation. Chitterlings were more than a meal. They were heritage, a reminder of making do with what little was given and turning it into pride. You didn't just eat chitlins, you respected them, for they told a story of survival in every bite. Stuffed bell peppers with ground beef and rice were proof that care and seasoning could make anything feel special. Bright green peppers were hollowed and filled with a savory mix of meat, onions, rice, and spices, then topped with tomato sauce and baked until tender. The peppers softened just enough to cradle the filling without losing their shape, releasing a sweet aroma that filled the kitchen. It was a meal that looked fancy but came from frugality, made to stretch ingredients and satisfy families. Every forkful was balanced, hearty, tangy, and comforting all at once. The sauce baked into the rice, the edges caramelized slightly, and the result was pure home. These peppers didn't need garnish or pretense. They stood for what Southern kitchens did best, transforming the everyday into something worthy of joy. The sound of the bubbling sauce was like a quiet applause from the oven, proof that patience always paid off. Some cooks used green peppers, others red or yellow for sweetness, but each one told a story of thrift turned triumph. Served hot with a side of cornbread or salad, it was the kind of dish that could feed a crowd on a budget while tasting like abundance. The peppers sat proudly on the table, shining with color and care, food that looked humble but felt like love. Peach cobbler with biscuit crust was summer's farewell song baked in a single dish. Fresh peaches simmered with sugar and spice until their syrup bubbled thick and golden. On top, a layer of biscuit dough turned crisp and tender in the oven, soaking up the fruit's sweetness without ever getting soggy. When pulled from the heat, it hissed softly, that beautiful sound of bubbling sugar cooling down. Served warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, it was comfort and sunlight all in one spoonful. Families gathered around it with plates still hot, no need for manners when the smell was that good. Cobbler wasn't fancy, but it was full of heart, a dessert made from love, labor, and the fleeting taste of ripe peaches. Every bite carried warmth, memory, and gratitude for the season that made it possible. The smell alone could stop conversation mid-sentence, thick with butter and sugar and a whisper of cinnamon. Grandmothers baked it by feel, measuring with sight and instinct rather than spoons. Children fought for the corners where syrup had thickened into caramel gold. Cobbler wasn't just dessert. It was a gathering, a celebration of what the earth had given before it slipped away into autumn. Corn pudding casserole was the bridge between side and dessert, sweet enough to comfort, savory enough to belong beside the main dish. Made from creamed corn, eggs, butter, and a touch of sugar, it baked into a golden dish that quivered just slightly in the middle. The top browned beautifully, while the inside stayed soft and custardy. Each spoonful melted on the tongue, rich with the flavor of corn and cream. It showed up at holidays, reunions, and church dinners, a dish that never shouted but always shined. Grandmothers called it simple, but everyone knew it was perfection. Corn pudding casserole was a recipe of balance, a little sweet, a little salt, and a lot of love. Its scent alone could stop a conversation and pull people toward the kitchen. When served hot, steam rose in ribbons that smelled like butter and home. The spoon always left a perfect scoop, revealing the silky inside beneath its golden top. Sometimes it was baked in cast iron, sometimes in glass, but always with the same care. It was comfort that belonged to every table, a reminder that the best dishes didn't need grandeur, just warmth, patience, and love baked slow. Shrimp and grits began as breakfast for fishermen and grew into a dish that defined the southern coast. The grits were cooked slow with milk or stock until creamy and smooth, then topped with buttery shrimp seasoned with garlic, pepper, and sometimes a hint of hot sauce. The flavors mingled, ocean and earth, comfort and fire, in a way that felt like home to anyone lucky enough to taste it. The shrimp curled pink and tender against the pale grits, each bite rich and satisfying. It was humble food, elevated by mastery, born from necessity but carried by pride. What started as sustenance turned into an art form, a meal that told the story of survival and craft. Shrimp and grits wasn't just breakfast anymore. It was heritage served warm, one spoonful of history at a time. On Sundays, it made its way to church luncheons and family tables, becoming both a comfort and a celebration. The steam rising from the bowl smelled like the coast itself, salt, butter, and thyme. Some cooks added bacon or andouille, others kept it pure, but all agreed it was a dish that could silence a room in the best way. In every mouthful was a taste of endurance, creativity, and love, the soul of the South in its truest form. Blackberry jam cake was the dark, spiced heart of many holiday tables. Thick with molasses, cloves, cinnamon, and blackberry preserves, it baked up dense and fragrant, its sweetness deep and mature. Each slice tasted of patience, of slow baking and careful stirring, of flavors layered and aged. The jam gave it color and tang, cutting through the richness like sunlight through clouds. Topped with a drizzle of caramel icing or left plain, it was beautiful either way. Every family had its own version, passed down through notebooks smudged with time. The cake wasn't showy, but it carried the weight of memory in every crumb. One bite was all it took to remember, the laughter, the voices, the old kitchens where sugar and spice met tradition. It was the kind of cake baked for company and special occasions, where scent alone could draw everyone in from the porch. The sweetness lingered in the air long after the oven cooled. Each ingredient had a story, from the blackberries picked by hand to the molasses stirred slow and steady. It wasn't a dessert you rushed, it was one you respected, knowing it held the history of every hand that had made it before. Potato salad with paprika and relish was the silent judge of every cookout. Made with boiled potatoes, chopped eggs, relish, and a creamy dressing, it looked simple but demanded precision. Too much mustard, and it was sharp. Too little, and it fell flat. The best versions were balanced perfectly, smooth, tangy, and seasoned just right. A dusting of paprika across the top was the signature flourish, bold and beautiful. Served chilled, it paired with ribs, fried chicken, or anything smoky from the grill. Every family claimed theirs was the right way, and every gathering ended with empty bowls to prove it. Potato salad was never just a side. It was a statement of skill and pride, a dish that spoke louder than words ever could. It was always the first dish judged and the last to leave the table, the quiet champion of summer reunions and church picnics. Some made it creamy and cool, others preferred a bit of crunch, but everyone had an opinion on the right way to make it. The real secret wasn't the ingredients. It was the touch, that sense of when it felt just right beneath the spoon. Each spoonful carried the warmth of family. Chitlins with vinegar peppers were more than a dish. They were an event. Preparing pig intestines required hours of cleaning and cooking, often becoming a group effort among family members. Once ready, the chitlins were simmered slowly with onions, garlic, and spices until tender, their earthy flavor deepened by the cooking process. To serve, they were topped with tangy vinegar-soaked peppers, cutting through the richness and adding a bright kick. This dish was especially popular in winter months, often tied to holiday celebrations or community gatherings where large pots fed many people. The smell of chitlins cooking was unmistakable, and while some loved it and others turned away, no one could deny its cultural significance. It was a connection to a history of making use of every part of the animal, and to the resilience of cooks who worked with what they had. Today, chitlins with vinegar peppers are rare outside of certain communities, but the tradition lives on in the memories and taste buds of those who grew up with them. Bars were the sticky sweet treasures of church bake sales and weekend coffee hours. A simple base of yellow cake mix formed the bottom layer, pressed into a pan to create a soft crust. The topping combined cream cheese, powdered sugar, and eggs into a rich custard that baked into a slightly crisp surface while staying deliciously gooey beneath. Cut into neat squares once cooled, they delivered a sweet rush that paired perfectly with strong coffee or a cold glass of milk. Children loved the melt-in-your-mouth texture, while adults appreciated the effortless preparation and crowd-pleasing flavor. In the 1970s, these bars spread quickly through community cookbooks and potluck tables, their irresistible combination of convenience and indulgence making them a near constant presence. Chess squares proved that simplicity could be decadent, offering a dessert so rich and satisfying that one bite was never enough, ensuring their place in the memories of countless family gatherings and joyful kitchen conversations. Cherry Jubilee. Wild persimmon leather served as a natural energy bar long before packaged snacks existed. Fully ripe wild persimmons, soft and honey-sweet, were mashed into a smooth pulp and spread thinly on clean boards or large leaves. Left in the sun to dry or placed near the gentle heat of a hearth, the mixture became a chewy sheet that kept for weeks. This portable treat provided a quick source of calories for long days in the fields and could be tucked into cloth packets for later use. The technique echoed African and indigenous methods of drying fruit to preserve it for travel and winter storage. After emancipation, many rural families continued to make persimmon leather as an autumn tradition, and some Appalachian homesteads still practice it today. Its deep caramel flavor and long shelf life show how ingenuity and patience created foods that were both practical and delicious. Wild persimmon leather stands as a vivid link between past and present, proving that simple preservation can yield enduring taste and nourishment. Chitlins' holiday feast once marked winter celebrations with an aroma as unforgettable as the labor required to prepare it. Hog intestines were cleaned thoroughly, then simmered for hours with onions, vinegar, and spices until tender. The dish demanded patience and community, often bringing families together for a full day of washing and cooking. Served with hot sauce and cornbread, chitlins carried the history of using every part of the animal, a practice born of necessity during slavery and carried forward as a mark of resilience. Despite the strong scent that filled kitchens and neighborhoods, the feast represented abundance and pride, especially during Christmas and New Year gatherings. Elders spoke of the old days while younger generations learned the careful methods required to make the dish safe and flavorful. In many places, health concerns and changing tastes have pushed chitlins aside, but the tradition still holds a powerful place in memory as a symbol of perseverance and celebration. Butter beans and rice were another cheap but comforting meal that carried families through lean times. Butter beans, with their creamy texture, were slow-cooked until tender, often flavored with a smoked ham hock or bone if one was available. The smoky taste infused the beans and created a rich broth that poured beautifully over rice. My grandmother used long-grain rice that stretched a pot of beans into enough servings for the whole household. The dish was hearty, filling, and nourishing, feeding both body and spirit. Butter beans were inexpensive compared to meat, yet they carried enough protein to keep families going strong. Children learned to appreciate the soft beans and flavorful broth as part of everyday meals, and adults recognized their value in stretching budgets. It was not a dish of extravagance but of practicality, a dinner that turned cheap staples into something people looked forward to. Butter beans and rice told the story of resilience in kitchens where every penny counted and every plate needed to satisfy. Batter-fried catfish was a highlight of Southern fish fries, where friends and family gathered for food, music, and conversation. Fresh-caught catfish from rivers or ponds were cleaned, filleted, and coated in a seasoned cornmeal batter before being dropped into hot oil. The result was a golden, crispy crust giving way to tender, mild-tasting fish. Often served with coleslaw, hush puppies, and tartar sauce, it was a meal that celebrated both the bounty of local waters and the joy of community. In African American culture, fish fries were more than a way to eat. They were social events that strengthened ties and offered a space for laughter and storytelling. Batter-fried catfish was a centerpiece of these gatherings, appreciated for its satisfying crunch and comforting flavor. While farm-raised catfish has made the fish more widely available, the traditional preparation and community-centered events around it have become less frequent. For those who experienced them, the memory of hot, crispy catfish eaten outdoors among friends remains a cherished part of culinary history. sweet potato pound cake blended the rich earthiness of its namesake vegetable with the classic heft of a traditional pound cake, creating a dessert that felt both familiar and new. Roasted sweet potatoes were pureed and folded into a batter of butter, sugar, eggs, and warm spices, giving the cake a golden hue and moist crumb. Baked in a heavy bundt pan, it emerged fragrant with cinnamon and nutmeg, the crust forming a delicate, sugary edge. Served plain, dusted with powdered sugar, or drizzled with a light glaze, it fit equally well at Sunday dinners or holiday feasts. Families prized the recipe for its ability to stretch a single vegetable into a show-stopping centerpiece. In African-American households of the 1970s, sweet potato pound cake stood as a reminder of resourcefulness and tradition, turning a humble root into a dessert worthy of celebration. Each slice offered comfort and pride, proving that heritage and innovation could live side by side on the family dessert table without ever losing their soulful heart. Chess squares, often called gooey butter, red drink, Juneteenth punch flowed like a symbol of freedom and memory at community celebrations marking emancipation. Made from hibiscus petals or bright strawberries steeped into a deep crimson infusion, the drink stood for resilience and the blood of those who fought for liberation. Families would gather in churchyards and town squares, pouring the sweet, tangy liquid into simple cups while music and laughter filled the warm June air. Children chased each other between picnic tables as elders told the story of the first Juneteenth, reminding everyone of the hard-won joy behind the holiday. The punch often carried a gentle spice from cloves or ginger, offering a flavor both refreshing and layered, much like the history it honored. Preparing the drink was as important as drinking it, with women and men alike contributing fruit, sugar, and labor to the cause. Though some communities still keep the tradition alive, many younger generations have never tasted the vibrant red drink that once defined a day of remembrance and celebration. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillets, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Hog maw stew was the kind of meal that made the most out of what was available, a true reflection of Southern frugality and resourcefulness. Pork stomach was cleaned thoroughly, stuffed or chopped, and then slow-cooked with potatoes, onions, and seasonings until the flavors melded into a rich, hearty broth. In rural African-American kitchens, nothing went to waste, and this dish turned what some might discard into a meal that could feed a large family. It was common to prepare this stew during colder months when hearty meals were most welcome, and the aroma would fill the house long before it was served. The texture was tender, the broth flavorful, and it was often accompanied by cornbread to soak up every drop. Beyond being just food, hog maw stew was a testament to survival, ingenuity, and the ability to transform humble ingredients into something memorable. Today, it is rare to see it on a menu, yet for those who grew up with it, the taste remains unforgettable, tied to family gatherings, laughter, and a sense of making do with what you had. Sweet potato biscuits once brought warmth to breakfast tables and Sunday dinners alike. Mashed sweet potatoes blended with flour, butter, and a touch of sugar created a dough that baked into soft, slightly sweet rounds. These biscuits paired beautifully with salty country ham or a drizzle of sorghum syrup, offering a perfect balance of savory and sweet. Families often baked them in batches large enough to feed relatives and neighbors, turning an ordinary morning into a quiet feast. The natural sweetness of the potatoes gave the biscuits a gentle orange hue, a visual comfort as well as a culinary one. Children were often given the task of mashing the cooked potatoes, a small role that made them proud participants in a beloved family recipe. Today, store-bought rolls and instant mixes have replaced the slow, careful preparation of true sweet potato biscuits. For those who remember their fragrance filling the kitchen, each bite carries memories of kinship, generosity, and a heritage that deserves to be cherished. Which of these dishes would you bring back first? Comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tastes of home.